Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today on Roll20. Follow the show on social media. We are on Twitter and Facebook at SWGM Podcast. Support the show. Sling us a buck over on Patreon/SWGM Podcast. And like, subscribe, share on YouTube channel /Savage Worlds GM Podcast. And the same moniker on iTunes. Download and subscribe today. iTunes /Savage Worlds Game Master Podcast. Tonight's episode, Setting the Table. We want to talk about game prep in Savage Worlds. And here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
And welcome to the land. Yeah, welcome to the land of no
to those of you watching, to those of you listening to this as a podcast or watching later, show up on time.
Yeah, right.
And put your phones away.
Yeah, Chris.
I was only 10 minutes late tonight, and that was to the green room.
Well, you know, we've always said the show starts ish. We're very big believers on ish. So if you're watching the live stream, feel free to participate in the chat. We do draw that into the show. So tonight's episode, we want to really talk about game or session prep as it applies to you running your games. And one of the things you'll hear over and over, one of the selling points of Savage Worlds, other than, oh, the core rulebook's only $9.99, the other major thing you'll hear is, no prep needed. It's practically prepless.
Not the case.
No, not so much.
Especially if you're running a plot point, I think a plot point, even though it's there for you, I think it takes a little bit more work and it takes a little bit more prep work, because like I'm running Last Sons and I'm running on Sunday and we played 2 weeks ago and I haven't, really looked at anything. So I'm gonna have to spend a little bit of time. What's the next adventure? The next plot point is a really long plot point, so I need to look over that and get that stuff prepared. So prep free, maybe prep light, especially if you're really an improv GM and you're one of those people who can go in and you're running your own stuff and running off the top of your head, and and you're creative, unlike those of us who use plot points who can't be creative.
Well, ooh. Beyond the plot point, we're going to touch on a lot of stuff tonight that you absolutely have to do as prep, regardless of whether you're running by the seat of your pants or running an established plot point or one sheet or something of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're running something that you've planned out or written, or you're kind of running off the seat of your pants, it's good that maybe prep wise, maybe have a few NPCs written down that you might use, have a few stats. I mean, we always say, hey, it's real easy. Give them all a D6 and a D8 and the one thing they're good at, and same with skills. But you might want to spend you might have that special NPC that is coming up. So you want to spend a little time to make that him stand out a little more, or her stand out a little bit more and have a little more oomph, so that you're not trying to think off the top of your head, oh God, well, what edge should this person have, or what monstrous ability should I give this monster? Spend a little bit of time on that ahead of time, and it'll go a long way in making your game run smoother. And then your players will go, oh my God, he's so prepared and so ready, when maybe you just kind of are making stuff up on the fly for the most part.
Well, and I mean, the interesting thing with that is that you can do that with a throwaway character that's only going to show up once, but you want it to be a very flavorful character. You want that character to set a specific tone. So you drop this character in that's got a D6 and everything, a D8 in fighting, and has the martial arts edge and the brawny edge. Those are the only two extra additions you've done, but you also in the back of your head, he's cocky, he walks with a swagger, because he knows he can knock people down very easy. They may not stay down, he may not do a lot of wounds, but he can get you on your butt because he's got those extra bonuses that you've padded in. So you can mold that character to have a very specific tone and a very specific flavor to drop in as a throwaway. You also absolutely need to, with any kind of character that might be recurring, once they have shown up more than twice, at that point, you need to have a full set of stats for that NPC, along with a little bit of a backstory, notes on anything you've already said to the players about them so that you can keep that character consistent. But then you jot down a little section at the bottom of the character sheet and just title it MO, modus operandi. This guy always starts combat with a taunt. This guy, favors his left hand over his right in non-combat situations, but uses his right only in combat. You can flavor in little things like that set this character up to be not stilted, but very specific, so that it's easy to point to that character and go, hey, this guy makes the scene more interesting, and there's a reason your players are going to remember that character from each time they show up.
Yeah, very much so. And have, know what those, we're talking about what edges we're going to give them, and know what those edges do, because I've even fallen into this before where even in a plot point, I've looked up at, an NPC, and he's got these edges. I know the vast majority of what all the edges do, and a lot of them are already taken into account, like broadening and things like that. But you want to make sure that you know what they're doing, the edge does, so that you can use it for one, and not slow down the game by having to look it up, or just end up saying, "Oh, I don't remember what that one does, so I'm just going to go ahead," and he'll never use that one, and then you're hamstringing that NPC who could do something maybe really cool, because you're not sure, you didn't take the time to do a little bit of legwork ahead of time to figure out what they could do and what all their edges were.
Especially you get something like No Mercy in a game where you don't have blood and guts. You don't think about the ability to re-roll damage, but that character specifically has it, and it's probably part of their modus operandi that they re-roll for high damage when they attack, because that's why they bought that edge.
Yeah, they took it for a reason. Or you gave it to them for a reason, I guess you could say.
And here's the thing, too. I also want to talk about the things that you don't necessarily think of when you think of prep. Everybody thinks of, okay, combat. I'm going to say, know what you're going to be doing. Like, say, for example, that maybe you have it planned that the character is going to be introduced to this new NPC because they're in a tavern and he decides to challenge them to a drinking contest. Okay. How are you going to what rules are you going to use to manage that drinking contest? Are you going to use any rules to manage that drinking contest, or is it just purely flavor?
If there's a drinking contest, what items are on the menu? What can they order as far as food, but especially drink? Is there that one drink the bartender knows how to make, or is there the one drink the bartender knows how to make to knock you on your ass, another one to wake you up, the third is the ale that's on tap, the fourth is a honey mead that they keep on hand. The last is an elven wine that they only pull out for those freaking highfalutin elves that come in occasionally and ask for something, and there's one chalice in the whole place to hold wine.
Right.
You have a few of those details kind of locked in the back of your head for what's that tavern like, in case that develops into something where a player goes, well, what's on the menu, barkeep?
Right. Beer. If you decide to do the drinking contest, for example, you could run that as an opposed dramatic task using vigor. And if they fail the dramatic task, they pass out. They pass out drunk.
That'd be the easiest way to do it. Pretty straightforward.
Run it as a social conflict.
Yeah, I would say that might work
Every time they get their turn, they get to be boisterous and a blowhard, and then they get to roll stealth to pour it over their shoulder, or they get to roll vigor to just down the thing, and they every success and raise gets them more tokens, and whoever has the bigger pile of tokens drank more or seemed to drink more during the contest. I mean,
and this is what we're saying with that. So not a combat, not something the players are expecting, but the idea that you've put some forethought into it and know what to do if they accept this drinking challenge makes the game a lot more. Hold on. There's going to be quakes through the internet.
Oh my God. Say it.
Immersive.
Oh, there it was. Oh.
And memorable.
Well, also be aware of some other little things. Like, if this turns into a combat, who are the other people in the bar, and are they likely to get involved? Is there rough terrain? Is there a chandelier? Is there an upstairs that goes to a balcony, or is there only an upstairs that goes to quarters?
Yeah, there are peanut shells and liquor all over the floor.
Yeah, have some idea of what the bar's layout is in the back of your head as soon as you introduce it, in case someone says, I walk over, grab a guy, and throw him through the front window. Well, is there a front window? Can they do that? If not, go, no, but you absolutely can throw him against the wall, and the deer head falls off the wall and hits him on the head after you slam him into it. Have some idea to be able to describe that environment, regardless of whether it turns into a combat, or let's say you were prepped you've got combat stats for everybody in the tavern, and the face character walks in and challenges the biggest, burliest guy to a drinking contest. Now you've got to know all those details we talked about a second ago about what's on the menu and how you're going to run a drinking contest in case your player does that, because these are those left turns we always talk about players taking. You've prepped for one thing, and here comes that thing you didn't expect. You have to think a little more broadly when doing that prep, because
And then also, too, I would say this. Part of prep, of what the kind of style of prep we're talking about, also requires you to ask yourself what's interesting. What's expected, what's not expected, what's interesting. And I would say this. Maybe this whole drinking challenge is a ruse. It's a distraction so that the barmaid that he's bribed is pouring sleeping powder into everybody else in the party's drink while they're watching this thing go down, because he intended to knock all the other people in the party out and only deal with this one person.
Or he's got a pickpocket working the characters while they're all paying attention, and he and this pickpocket are gonna basically, share the loot from the characters. I mean, yeah, there's lots of different things you can do with that.
There's a bard walking around just strumming and singing to the contest while a secondary person is slinking through the crowd picking everybody's pockets. Right. And it's not even connected to the person you're having the drinking contest with. This is just a couple of thieves who were in the bar when the drinking contest went off, and you knew in the back of your head, oh, the bard always travels with his pet thief. They're going to take advantage of this moment that the players have just created.
Right.
And it can be as easy as okay, so tonight in your game they're going to go in the tavern, just bullet point some stuff. Okay, bullet point drinking contest, bullet point bard, bullet point thief, and just kind of bullet point this stuff. You don't have to spend a whole ton of time writing it up. But again, what we're saying, you prep a little bit of that ahead of time, and you have 4 or 5 bullet points, and you could make a lot more shit up as you go. But at least it gives you, again, as I said earlier, it gives you that jumping off point. And I think that's kind of what you want, is you want that good jumping off point. And I think you need to do that in plot points. I need to work on that a little bit more, is read over the plot point and in OneNote, make some bullet points on each plot point. That way I don't have to keep going to the book, and I kind of have at least a general idea of what's going on, and it might help me run a quicker, smoother game.
Well, here's what I'm saying. If it's important enough for you to say, hey, this set piece of the tavern is going to be included in tonight's story, then don't make it feel like a random encounter that you just pulled out of your ass and dropped on the table. I mean,
exactly.
Do something with it. Make sure if all you want to do really is just go through in your head as a GM and go, okay, the barkeep's name is Ernest, and he has a peg leg, and he walks like this. He owns the bar, but he's about to lose it to taxes. So he's made all these deals with that. There's this hobbit that there's a halfling that comes in.
Even if all you've done is define that bartender, he's got a peg leg, he's about to lose the bar to taxes. If you stop right there, you've done a very highly detailed bartender. In your mind, you now know that this bar, the stairs might be the only thing in the entire bar that are in good repair, because otherwise he can't get up and down them. But because of his taxes, he can't afford to repair everything else. So there's dirty glasses, there's tables that wobble, there's chairs that wobble.
He waters the beer down. He's watered all the liquor down.
Are going to insert some of that information into the scene on their own because of how highly detailed you were when you described that opening. One of the big things they teach in like novel writing classes and things like that is this idea of doing a lot with very little, because they're trying to teach you to keep the word count on your novel a little lower. So they talk about, if you want to describe a rundown apartment in a bad part of town, don't describe a rundown apartment in a bad sort of town. Describe, you kick the door open and you can see the window slightly ajar and the bullet holes in the corner. You can see the blood stain on the carpet beneath the window. That immediately tells your players that this isn't a bad part of town. They don't have to question, is that a downtown apartment in Manhattan? They know this is off in the Bronx somewhere automatically, right, because of that description. You can do a lot by being very detailed about those few things you put in those bullet points, and then it'll inform the other stuff. If you have a bar and you name it the Prancing Pony, they're going to expect the stuff that they associate with the Prancing Pony in the bar. That was one detail item that you threw out there, knowing that your players all know that piece of lore. And automatically it sets up what the bar looks like, what's available on order, what the patrons of the bar look like.
That there's a guy in a dark cloak sitting in the corner.
Now, the other thing you can do as well, as far as prep, and we'll just very, very slightly go off on this tangent for just a second, you can play against tropes. So Chris just brought up a very, very common trope of a medieval tavern in a role-playing game session. There's always some asshole with a hood and a cloak over sitting in the corner with his back in a corner watching the room. Ooh, he's very mysterious. And, oh, you could barely catch a glint of his features as he on his pipe. And
he might give you a quest.
Right. Have that be the outrageous bard that just burst out the song the second they approach. You could play against type. So
it's the bar wench on her break, sitting there, finally getting her to put her feet up, and she's pissed when the players come over and show any interest in her.
Right. Like we were saying earlier too, the beer's watered down if the bartender is, fighting to keep the place alive. We're just saying, don't make if you're gonna present your characters with a set piece, a design, a scene, a location. You shouldn't feel like you're the player walking into it not sure what's going on in there. You're the GM.
As a GM, you planned that set piece for a reason. Make the set piece itself have some furniture, even if it's just
right.
The characters come to a crossroads in the wild. Okay, you knew you had a crossroads coming up. You know you were going to give the players this choice of left, right, center, however the crossroads works, but you knew you were going to put that hook in front of them to figure out what direction they went and what they encounter. You know that's coming up. Know how to describe that crossroads to them. Is there a hanging tree? Is there a signpost? Is it a dirt road, cobblestone? Is it dirt in one direction and cobble in the other? Have some ideas. One or two little very detailed things to say about something can capture that whole scene for you and really spin it. And it's a simple note on a notepad next to you, because you know that scene's coming up tonight.
Are they likely to encounter roadmen, bandits? Okay, have a few extras statted up for that particularly. Oh, well, wait. Oh, they're not going to encounter bandits because they went down the road to the north. Okay, well, we know the road to the north really quickly turns into forest at some point. And when they camp for the night, are wolves going to come to the camp? Well, I might want to have some wolves statted up and ready. I'm not necessarily worried about what kind of combat encounter I'm going to have, but I want to make sure that whatever I'm presenting them with is part of that living scenery logically.
Right, and that it doesn't feel like, we say, like a random encounter. Like it doesn't feel like you just, they're in the woods, so I feel like I have to throw wolves at them. Maybe you don't throw wolves at them. Maybe you throw something odd and weird that's in the woods, and they're going to think they're going to be wolves, and they might present as wolves, but then all of a sudden there's something else because you've taken the time to think about that a little bit ahead of time, and you have an index card next to you that says Wolfen.
Yeah.
No, they're not a real wolf.
Right, and it's not always about that either. It can be about knowing what consequences result from actions in your game world. So I'm going to share something personal. So I'm running a dead end, another zombie iteration Walking Dead zombie thing. And the one rule of this world is noise attracts the undead. So in order to keep that random and fair and balanced, what I do is every time there's a gunshot, I set a D6 aside. Every time there's a loud noise, I set a D6 aside. And at the end of that session or the beginning of the next, I roll those. And that's how many undead show up because they've been attracted by the noise.
That's awesome. That's a cool way to do it.
But that's part of game prep early on, asking yourself, wait a minute. I know that noises attract the undead. I don't want this to seem random or out of place. What can I do? How am I going to handle this to where it's fair and equitable and seems right? And that's just one example of, oh, okay, so here's what I'm going to do to make sure that the world has that kind of impact when they make that kind of decision.
So I think one of the big things that prep comes down to is a little bit of forethought. And it's not forethought in the railroady, what are my players going to choose to do tonight scheme. It's, hey, one of my players picked up a flamethrower last week. I need to have the cone template at the table in case they use it. Oh, I've got this crossroads coming up. One way I know leads possibly into bandits, another leads into a town, and the third way leads off into the forest. I might want to have some bandit miniatures at the table in case they go that direction.
Right.
It doesn't mean I need to even have stats for the bandits. Again, I can just go with the simple D6 and everything bandit when those bandits arrive, because the players may talk them down and not even end up in a fight, or they might just pay the toll and keep on going past the bandits. But having those minis gives me the ability to throw those on the map when the appropriate moment arrives. Whether that leads to a combat or not doesn't matter. But having that forethought, oh, in this direction it's a city, in this direction it's the woods, and this other direction it's a long dusty road that bandits are always camped on. Now I have the idea of these are the three directions they can go in. These are the three things I kind of sort of need something for. They go to the town, maybe I know where the guild hall is or the tavern is, and a couple descriptive points about it. They're going to the woods. I've got an idea in my head that, oh, there's a glowing fungus that's popular in this woods that looks like wolf's eyes. And then I'm going to run them through a interlude if they decide to camp. If they keep going, what's on the other side of the woods? Can they clear it in a single session? Or do you have something that's going to slow them down that happens in the woods? That's going to force them to camp or go off-road? Have some ideas of the way your world works that you can throw into the game. And another great example from Jared's Dead End game. We all know that if you get bit, you become a zombie. So how do other survivors react when they see someone with a bite wound? Know in the back of your head, do these people know? Is that something they're aware of? Would they react hostile, or would they react more positively? Would this guy who's really curious and a scientist immediately want to take them down to his laboratory? Or would the other person want to immediately tie them up and shoot him in the head? You have some idea of what your character reactions might be based on the world they live in.
Right. And it comes back to understanding motivations for story purposes. This is what we're kind of talking about. The medieval town, when they ride in it, how do villagers react to strangers and adventurers who pass through town? Do they immediately break eye contact, run into their homes and shut the shutters and all the businesses close down? Because
every time adventurers show up, the town burnt down?
Exactly. Every time adventurers show up, shit goes sideways. There's arrows and fire. And
goddamn adventurers, they always fuck everything up.
Or are they
opening to the Mel Brooks Men in Tights? God damn it, Mel Brooks. Every time you make a Robin Hood film, you burn our village down.
Yeah, or is the town incredibly opportunistic and the minute you start riding on your horse, there's a guy going, chickens for a pound, and people trying to sell them all kinds of stuff.
All the prices suddenly inflate 5
exactly.
times. No, those adventurers have gold, and we want that gold out of their pockets.
Right. So just understand how your world is in a certain scene is going to react. And then Dave brought up a very good point. So if you run theater of the mind, Be prepared with some lurid descriptions. Know what this place looks like. Talk about it in real measured links if you want to. Or tell the player characters, listen, this is a standard Wizards library. Whatever that means to you, you don't need to ask me if this and this is there. Just declare that it's there. And if I don't disagree, I won't say anything. And voila, it's there.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, if you've set your players up to understand that as a rule of your table, maybe that's a session 0 thing that you just explain. Hey, if I say you walk into the Wizard's library, assume anything that you think should be there is there until I tell you otherwise. If you've set that as a ground rule for your game, then all you need to do when you have them walk into that Wizard's library is describe one thing in depth, and the players will suddenly know how deep they can go when they have their character interacting with the library. How your description sets a tonal level for how deep their agency can let them craft the narrative in that library.
Right. And anticipate.
You know, my thought.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. So my thought was, when you mentioned the library, prepping for the library that you know they're going to go into, why not take a minute, think of this, your senses, and write, it could be one word about each sense, and put that into your description, especially theater of the mind. How does it smell? What is it? Is there some weird, even metallic taste you get when you walk into this? Is it moldy, mildewy? What's the air like? I mean, if you spend a couple minutes, again, I keep going back to, for some reason tonight, it's kind of on my mind, is just index cards with bullet points.
Yeah.
You know, and if you use the 5 senses, or, you know, maybe that'll help invoke that, and that's something you prep a little bit ahead of time.
Right.
Be careful with the senses thing, that you don't overdo your lurid description too. You want to make sure on sight plus something else, whether that's a 6th sense that you walk into the room and it's a chilled Wizard's library with many things hanging down and the musty smell of books sets a certain tone. But at the same time, I've now given you an awful lot that doesn't tell you anything about the library.
Right.
If I instead say, you walk in and immediately the hair on the back of your arm stands up, that could be cool, or it could be something's not right in here.
Right. Well, and here's what I'm going to say too, with your descriptions. Your description are almost foreshadowing, because you as the GM are going to be giving that description. What you choose to tell the players foreshadows what the response is going to be. So let's say, for example, we're in a zombie apocalypse and they come across Dirk's auto body and metal shop. And I describe, oh yeah, there's 2 bays. It's basically a gas station. Off to the right of the pump are 2 like accordion style aluminum vertical doors on chain pulleys. Now, why would I say that there's 2 aluminum doors on chain pulleys in an automotive bay? Because in a zombie apocalypse, when I go, oh, there's walkers coming towards the thing, I don't have to, the players know, oh, I can just pull these chains and bring the doors down. I've kind of foreshadowed by telling them that, hey, and I've told them it's an auto body shop. So guess what? There's hammers, there's screwdrivers.
To take that a next step, by saying it's a bay that's on a chain pulley, that might also mean that the lifts are hand operated, or there's a pit in there instead of the traditional hydraulic lift.
Right.
Because this is an older body shop. Instead of having automatic doors, it's got a chain lift system. Therefore, it's also going to have a few other things that make it an older body shop. There's a rack of tires off in one corner. The modern body shop really doesn't keep on hand anymore, but the older body shops still do. You can set a lot by very little in that description. And then when your players interject and they want to add something, in your mind, there are 3 things. There are 3 rules to this: yes and, no but, and then simple GM fiat. Yes and, yes, you find that, and there's also this, and add a specialty detail to the thing they went looking for. They look for a hammer. Yes, it happens to be a 4-pound sledge that they use to knock the tire and the rim loose. That's sitting there. You might find some ball peen hammers off in the other part where they're doing some more engine repair. Once you've done that, you've now set up the idea that there's multiple types of hammers in this bay that the players can do. You added that on the yes and.
Right.
Hey, I grabbed the hammer. No, there's not really a hammer right there nearby, but there is a tire iron left over from the last vehicle they worked on.
Right.
Use both of those interchangeably. And then GM Fiat is that thing where you've gotten too used to saying yes and no but. The GM Fiat is, yes, absolutely that's there. What do you do with it? Or, no, that's not available in this scene. Someone probably walked off with it earlier on in the looting. And then let the scene move on, let the player come up with some new thing. Don't get too rooted to either of the yes and or the no but, to the point that you bypass the third option, which is just yes or no.
Right. But the thing we're trying to communicate with this, setting it up and giving the description is, I'm broadcasting and telegraphing, this can be a stronghold against the undead. This can be a safe place to be for a little while against the undead, because you can put down the doors, you can crawl down the bay to the steps that go deeper down in where the cars just pull over, and there's steps on the other side leading down to the bay, so you can do oil change without a hydraulic. Yes, there's stuff. There's weapons, there's stuff. That's all I'm saying if you're going to go theater of the mind. What can also happen, what can also be good for Prep 2 is to find a photograph that's representative. Not a map, not an identical, this is exactly what you see, but telling the player characters, here's a kind of representation of what you're seeing. It's not exactly this, but it's kind of like it, a lot like it, just as a visual point of reference for them. Now, I'm going to say this. Even with that, they're going to lock into, well, what's to the left side of the barn? Hold on a second, guys. I said this was representational. So you have to make sure you keep bringing that back if you're going to show them a picture.
And be aware of everything that's in the picture.
Yes.
Because if you put out a picture, whether it's a map or just a little scene setter, if you throw out a visual aid, your players are going to notice details. You throw down a picture that shows a bay and it's all cows at a dairy farm. But all the way at the back of the bay off to one side, there's a little Caterpillar front end loader that they can just see the cage and the front of the bucket on. One of your players is going to jump on that front end loader during the scene because they see it in the picture and it triggers them to think of a plan that uses a front end loader. Right. So
I would say if that's the case, that's cool. Let them do it. Find a way to make it work.
That totally falls into the yes and or the no but category.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. Go ahead.
In that picture so that you're not blindsided when it happens. That's more what I'm saying.
Right.
Be aware of your handouts before you hand them out.
Right. And here's the thing too. Even if you weren't planning there to be a Caterpillar in that specific location on the farm, but your photo shows one there, if there would reasonably be one there, well, hell yeah, there's one there. Yeah, no, and it's exactly like it's shown in that picture. Because why? Because I'm a genius. That's why.
You're on a farm and they happen to have hay for all the cows. Yes, they do have a baler. Yes, they do have a combine. These are the things that would exist on that farm. So when the player says, I jump in the combine and run them over with it, yes, absolutely. Now make some dice rolls.
Right. And a lot of this is, you can only prepare for as much as you can prepare for. But if you're intimately aware of what the motivations are, what this place is about, you can start making very, very quick, educated, reasonable guesses as to, well, wait, I don't have the stats for a combine. That's okay. It's just a car. Give me a driving roll. It chops up, blah, 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 blah. What happens on a fail? Ooh, it gets clogged with the undead.
Yeah, pretty easy to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not saying you have to prep, even when I say detail, one detail of the room is all you need. And then everything else, just have an idea of your world. If If you're running the modern world and you describe that the players go into a home and the only thing you've come up with a description for is that entryway, make sure you've got in the back of your head, well, it's a ranch-style house. It's going to have 2 to 3 bedrooms. It's all going to be on one floor. It's going to have an entrance that goes down to the basement. These are things you know about a ranch-style house, and that all comes from the bullet point you had on that index card that Chris is so fond of that says ranch-style house, and then has a bullet point under it that describes the entryway. Everything else comes at the table rooted in the prep work of saying it is a ranch style house and this is what the entry.
Right. And
I gotta start using those damn things now that I've talked about them so much tonight.
Well, and I'll say this is a good exercise too, because being able to describe something and understand something that's imaginary, it helps to visualize the space. Because we are visual people. So, for example, in this zombie game, they're stopped at a dairy farm. So I had this idea that this dairy farm it's a 6th generation dairy farm. It's been this family for 6 generations. Okay, so we're going back as far as early 1900s. Okay, so then I stop and ask myself, okay, so what is this house? It's a farmhouse. It's probably American craftsman built. And then I close my eyes and picture myself walking through the house. For myself as a GM strictly. And this is just one of my personal prep things. I will close my eyes and envision myself. Okay. Oh, it's got one of those screen doors on the hinge where you open it, snaps back. And you open the door. It's got a round doorknob. It's an iron cast. So you open the door and you're looking at basically a large living room. The kitchen, formal dining room is off to one side. I go into the kitchen. What does the kitchen look like? Oh, it's all 1950s appliances. It's this, that, and the other. And you can do that as an exercise. And when the characters ask you, what's on the other side of the room? You just instinctively know, because it almost becomes as familiar to you as a house you grew up in. As a matter of fact, feel free to make it a place you've actually been and are familiar with.
And be aware, it's completely okay, even if you've done that walkthrough in your head as part of your, I don't want to necessarily call that prep as much as your world building. If you've already done that, and then the player says, I turn and go through the door to the right that leads into the X, yes, you absolutely do, and this is what that room looks like. Based on that walkthrough you already did in your head, you've just created a brand new room that didn't exist because the player said they wanted to go there and interact with it.
Right.
You can automatically, and I'm not talking about Quantum Ogre, I moved the upstairs bedroom down here to be available. No, but I know what the house looks like inside in my head from doing that walkthrough. So I can immediately create that room from scratch on the fly.
Right. Do they have a toaster? Absolutely. Do they have a barbecue pit in the backyard? You bet your ass. Yes, they do.
Is there propane? Is there propane in it?
No, because this guy's old school. It's charcoal, baby.
That's right. Texas, and he is propane and propane accessory.
Right.
Damn it, Bobby. So I'm interested in this question and see what you guys think. I'll give you my opinion on music at the table.
Yeah, CL Taylor asks, music at the table, yes, no?
I've tried it. I would say I'm of two minds. I say no because it's so hard to have the right music at the right time to not convey the wrong mood. But if you can do it right, and you can have some kind of like soundscape, which Sirenscape is a program you can use, something like that. I think it takes some work. So my thing on music at the table is I don't do it because I don't think I could do it well. But in our 5e game that we're doing Eberron, my buddy Dave is using Sirenscape, and it's working great because, I mean, we were down in a cave and he had this cave soundscape going. We were in a tavern. He had the tavern soundscape going, and he's got it with where it's just one click that he's got these things set up that it can just, he sets the scene and then clicks it and it goes. And you got to, what I would say too, is you got to kind of look at, I wouldn't use things with lyrics because because it can, then somebody's going to be singing the song in the back of the head or start singing at the table. Now, maybe it might be the case where you want that because you're playing some kind of, I ran a game called Disco Inferno, which was 1970s detectives and vampires, and they went into a disco. And I really wish I would have had some cool disco music that I could have queued up in the background while they were having the fight in the disco with the disco vampires.
See, and there's an aspect to music at the table that you don't want the music to ever overshadow anything that's happening. It has to be a support structure for your game and never something that's going to take the forefront of anybody's mind. So it's great in a zombie game to have a zombie moan that I can press a button and the players hear. And then I can say, you heard a zombie moan off of the distance. Give me a fear check. Why? Because the zombie moan, it jumps way to the forefront for a moment, but I'm not letting it continually play. It's not distracting from the game. It's adding to that immersive moment. Whereas in the disco, absolutely having just a disco instrumental track to play in the background as fight music kind of makes sense. But I would have a disco song that would be playing in the disco when they come in, and then I would have a record scratch. It's the 70s, and there's a DJ in the corner who turned and ran out when the fight started. You hear that record scratch. And then I start the fight, and I don't have the music playing to be a distraction, but I've already set the tone that you're in a disco, and that record scratch is that break moment. It tells the players, hey, something just happened, and oh, look, they can react to the fact the DJ ran to the door with the rest of them.
Right. And a while back, it's been a while ago, I ran Jared's Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park at a convention. And I tried to have Kiss music in the background, and it just didn't work.
No, it's not always going to. Here's the thing. I'm a fan of ambient background noise. Because it should add to your game, but I'm also the camp too that if you're talking most of it being music, it doesn't play at the table. Even if it's classical orchestra, Flight of the Valkyries playing, it's one more thing to juggle. It sounds like this. Oh, this is going to create this great blah blah blah, and then you spend 3 hours hunting down the perfect soundtrack. Another hour figuring out how to play it at the table. And that's 4 hours you could have spent on prep, really developing the world, really developing the scene, coming up with interesting combat maneuvers for the NPCs. I
like that. That's a really strong point.
It's more about time management than it is about theatrics at the table. Now, if you've run the same adventure 100 times and you could sleepwalk through it, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out. But don't make it a distraction because you're not doing live RP. This isn't what's the next step? Do we dim all the lights and use candlelight in a medieval fantasy?
And that might make sense for some games, but here's a big aspect of this that I really want to make sure we touch on. None of that is bad if that's your bag. But take a look at like Carl Kiesler. He's well known in the community for some amazing prep work he does on the physical side of the game.
I was going to go there next.
You can do a ton of prep work if that's your bag, but make sure you're doing it because you enjoy doing it.
Right.
Because all those physical handouts only add so much to the game. Being a good game master, knowing the rules to Savage Worlds, knowing the rules that go for your actual setting world, knowing the MO and the motivations of all the characters involved, knowing those things will take you much further than a really nifty character sheet that happens to unfold from an 8-track cassette holder. That physical handout can only get you so far. That piece of music that you're playing in the background can only get you so far. You have to be geared up and ready to do all the rest of the heavy lifting with it. Your prep work is better spent on those things, And if you have extra time, sure, you're going to run a disco scene. Name the top 3 disco songs that come to mind immediately and grab one of those 3. Don't go looking for some obscure song that you then have to, do a lot. Well, was this playing at the time that they... A great example of this is Stranger Things Season 2. Stranger Things Season 2 is set in 1984. So what do they have in...
Possible spoilers. Get ready.
What do they have in there? They have the kids in Ghostbusters uniforms. It's right in the trailer. I'm not giving a spoiler to anything. Why? Because that movie came out in 1984. You know what they didn't do? They didn't have a reference to every movie that did come out in 1984. You only need one little thing to add to that brings that detail that focuses that player attention.
And I'm going to add one more thing to this. Should you have music at the table? Should you have soundscapes at the table? I'm going to liken it to a morning zoo soundboard on radio stations where I guarantee you the DJ is in love with the pig noise that he plays or the sound effect that he plays, but I guarantee you he does not believe that the audience finds it annoying and distracting.
Sometimes.
Exactly.
Take with that what you will. Now, here's the other thing I want to talk about too, real quick. So the other part of prep too, we've talked about this as well. Dave touched on it. And we call this so much stage dressing. Do you have thematic themed bennies? Are you using, a deck of playing cards that are thematic to what's going on? Do you have specialty character sheets? So for example, if you're running an investigative noir game, is their character sheet, their main stats, all part of like a badge for their detective badge that you actually hand out to them? Because, well, that would be cool.
No. It's one of those old school flippable notebooks.
There you go.
That you flip open and it's got all their stats, and it's also got, a few combat maneuvers on the next page.
Yeah. Or do you give them that character sheet? Do you give them that character sheet where the background is the detective's messy desk with the lit cigarette and ashtray, top down, and then the actual data is over top of it? How do you do it? However you want to do it. If you want to go to that level, feel free. It just adds to the game. With that, I'm going to say this. So much presentation goes into that. It's a little bit of stage theatrics. If you're going to play in a con, by all means, go all out. Make a good show of it for new players.
Right, and that leads to prepping a little bit ahead of time, because you were saying with Carl with his physical stuff. I mean, Carl is already getting his stuff and his physical things ready for Gen Con in August. He's got pictures of his Sharknado trailer park game that he's going to run. Right. That I think I've guaranteed myself a seat in it. He said he's going to save me one even if I can't sign up.
Well, here's the thing with Carl.
He's got that stuff ready now, but that's his job.
Exactly. Thank you.
Art director.
He's a graphic artist with all.
I'm never going to come up with that coolest shit. Really, I'm not going to kid myself and say I'm going to come up with that cool stuff. I'm going to go into Hero Lab and create my character sheets in Hero Lab.
Well, I think there's something to be said too about, again, if it's your bag. Carl's bag is going over the top with that stuff. So I would say his next Gen Con, he started planning it in September of the previous.
Right. Oh, he probably did. As soon as he finished last year's Gen Con, he's getting the next one ready.
Exactly.
Well, and Carl does this too. Carl finds papercraft minis for buses and terrain. He also enjoys like repurposing Hero Clicks action figures, putting them on new bases, painting them
Hot Wheels.
Yes. Okay, great.
Hot Wheels, you model cars, the whole 9 yards. But
he has a talent for it, and he has the tools and resources to pull it off at a professional level.
And it's already his hobby.
Right.
He already enjoys doing model work and stuff away from the game. So he's not taking anything away from his game prep.
Right.
To do this stuff as set dressing.
So
right, exactly.
Let's say we're going to play Deadlands. Go ahead and use plastic bullets for bennies. Color code them differently. The Benny Bool, the Benny Pin. Make it a shot glass. Give everybody a shot glass with their bennies in it. You could do thematic things with it. Make their character sheets wanted posters. Whatever. I mean, you could do whatever you want with it. Whatever you can bring to the stage presentation, feel free to do it. Don't kill yourself trying to do it and make it a chore. It should not be a job. Like, oh God, I hate. Here's a great example. So I ran a Ghostbusters game at a live convention in Savage Worlds. All I did was go out to a Walgreens and buy the red plastic poker chips that were cheap as shit, got inkjet printer 1/2-inch circular labels, and printed the no ghost symbol in the middle, and it was perfectly sized to sit right in the middle of that red poker chip. And those were the bennies. Did I need a graphics art degree? No. But that has a big impact because, oh, look, we actually have Ghostbuster bennies. Cool. So the thing is, do what you can do. Now, with an investigative game, let's talk real quick about investigative games, because those can be some very difficult things to run. So understand and ask yourself, okay, what clues are to be found in this area when they go in there? Now, decide for yourself, do we even want to roll notice rolls for clues? Or do I want to just find the clues and then use other skills to interpret what those clues mean? Kind of figure out how you're going to approach finding clues in an investigative game as part of your game prep for your investigative game.
Or do I want the clues to be there, and those clues, you can interpret those, but those clues are what's going to lead you to the big set pieces.
Right, you're going to lead you to more clues.
I don't need the notice roll. I'm going to find those clues, and that clue might lead me to another clue, which leads me to a set piece, which leads me to another clue, which, and prep work of more than one way to find the clue. I guess you don't have to worry about that as much as if you're not going to make them roll notice rolls, because then they can't miss it. But if you're going to make them make notice rolls, make sure you have more than one way to find that clue, so that it doesn't make things grind to a halt.
Here's what I'm going to say real quick. So, I mean, there's a whole treatise on how to do this properly with Savage Worlds. It's called Deadlands Noir. Go check out the game mastering section for Deadlands Noir. It's going to talk about this much more intelligently than we can, or we will. I'm going to say this. Deadlands Noir in my opinion, gets it right, because no detective movie I've ever seen is about the player not being able to find cleverly hidden clues. They somehow magically always find the clues they need to find. Now, here's the thing. What happens to them while they're tracking down those leads is where the story lies. So Deadlands Noir does a very good job in this and saying, hey, give them the clue. Now, when they go to investigate it, they're going to make a streetwise roll. On a failure, they get beat up, and it costs them some money. On a success, it just costs them a little bit. On a raise, it just costs them a little bit of money. On a success, it didn't cost me money, but they took a beating. And they're coming back from that investigation with a level of fatigue. So you can make it about the persuasion roll to get into Club Flamingo, because they found the matchbook in the office for the Club Flamingo. I don't need to make a notice roll about Club Flamingo.
The aspect of this that I would say is, for me, it's less about knowing mechanics and how you're going to use them, and more about this aspect of prep for me is know what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to tell a high action adventure game, then the story beats need to be high action adventure moments. If you're telling a pulp game, they need to be pulp story beats. So one, as a GM, it's an art form. Go out and learn storytelling. Mm-hmm. Two, though, is in your mind have set up those story beats are the things you need to have prepped for. If you know that in the upcoming thing, the players are going to do a temple dive, a la Raiders of the Lost Ark, then you've got a pit of snakes, you've got a stone trap, you've got a dart trap. Know the rules for hazards, know the rules for collision damage, what happens when the stone runs into you, and know the rules for falling and poison. Why? Because those are the things are coming up. But the other thing is, know what makes a pulp game exciting. What should those moments be? If you're running a mystery game and you can't tell a mystery story, you can't run a mystery game. I don't care how much you've read Deadlands Noir. I don't care how much you've read Gumshoe. You can't run a mystery game if you don't know how to tell a mystery story. So be aware of those things when you're doing this type of prep. It's less about knowing the better way to use a chase in the scene and more about knowing, should there be a chase, right, or should there be this other thing that takes what should your story beats be? What mechanic then fits that story beat effectively for the setting you're running? That's the way you construct these big moment, set pieces, scenes for your players.
Right. Well, I would say too, but if we're talking about investigative game, it's a very good point you made, Dave. Let's say we're talking about investigative game. What's the important thing for you to prep? Well, you should know who done it.
See,
or you could say, I'm gonna let the players figure that out. I'm gonna put out 3 suspects, 3 plausible solutions to the crime of who did it, and we'll just see what happens. There's a number of ways you could kind of run it.
It's like the movie Clue. You're going to have 3 different endings.
GM, I'm going to run the gamut of, I know what happened. Not the who did what, but I know so-and-so was murdered on the train.
Okay.
That's all I know going in. I also know all the motivations of every character that's on the train. Right. I know every room of the train intimately. Right. As a GM, I've put the prep work in. I know the setting very well in a mystery game. I automatically know where everything is. I know what's in the cupboard. Why? Because in an action game, I wouldn't have to. I don't care. But in a mystery game, a player is going to go searching in that cupboard looking for a clue. I need to know what's in the cupboard.
Right. So, yeah. And we could talk mechanics all day long. You could say, well, when you okay, so they find the Club Flamingo matchbox. They follow that clue to Club Flamingo, and there's a femme fatale songstress, singing swan, femme fatale, Jessica Rabbit on stage, and that's who they're there. They're going to interview them, and she knows something that she's not telling them. They make a persuasion roll, depending on how well they do. She hints at it, or she gives it away completely, or she doesn't give it away completely until the player character, you feel like she's holding something back. Oh, well, I follow her. Excellent. Let's talk about you tailing her. I mean, it's just, Dave's right. You need to know who was killed, why, how, and everybody who has a motive for it. But once again,
that's my style of telling a mystery. If you know the mystery story beats, if you know that detective investigative game, you know all the story beats of it, then maybe you do know who the villain is. Maybe you know exactly what's going on in the Upside Down. Now you just have to negotiate informing your players through interesting story beats that lead to that goal. You don't know the in-between, but you know the goal they're chasing after, and you know the start, and you let your players come up with an interesting way to get there. That
let me throw
style too.
Yeah, and you keep talking about the story beats. If you want a good book about that, Hamlet's Hit Points.
Mm-hmm.
Very good book about different types of stories and different types of how to hit those different story beats.
Right.
The other thing I would suggest is Brandon Sanderson's BYU lecture series. If you just search Brandon Sanderson in YouTube, it's a 13 lecture series he did at BYU on how to write a novel. And you can kind of probably skip the ones that are about things like the business of novel writing. There's like 2 of those lectures, but you can go through those lectures and it talks about how to create a magic system. It talks about how to create characters that have actual motivations. It talks about how to do, with a few words on a description of one part of the room, how to expand the whole room. A lot of these things we're talking about tonight can be learned from a lot of these other resources.
Right. And I'm gonna go right back to the investigative game for one more point. What we're really saying more than anything else as part of this setting the stage and game prep thing is know how you want to run it, know what mechanics you're going to use and how you're going to use them, and figure all that out as part of your prep. don't show up and go, I guess you make a notice roll.
So,
oh, you're at the scene of the crime. Oh crap! Nobody has knowledge forensics. Does anybody have it? Did anybody take investigation? Anybody take notice? Oh shit!
What skills do you guys have it that might help on this?
So not to belabor the point of prep being important, I do want to touch on one thing I don't think we've talked about yet, and that is know the player characters, not the players, the characters. Know them intimately well enough. I don't need to know what your power does, but I certainly need to know how your arcane background works.
Right.
I don't have anybody taking psionics. It doesn't matter as a GM to me how psionics works for this game. I can literally forget it, and it makes no impact on my game. But if you've taken weird science, I damn well better know weird science backwards and forwards, even if I don't know the bolt or puppet power that your character has written down. I know how weird science is going to handle that power, and I can know the rules are always going to apply because you know the characters have those rules jotted down on their characters.
The other thing too is don't assume because you know how arcane background magic works that you've got arcane background weird science. They work completely differently. And here's the other thing to understand is how magic. You also need to understand how magic situational. Think ahead. Well, wait, can you maintain powers? Can you cast more than one power? If you've already cast a power and you've reached the end of your round, how do you maintain it? And can you cast another one while you're maintaining that one? What happens if you get shaken or wounded? What happens to the caster? Can the caster go, I'm going to spend this whole round not doing anything but concentrating for a bonus? You need to understand what the situational rules are that cover the power system.
And as I would also include things like the sheet of tokens and stuff that have been released by PEG. I would take those and repurpose them to a certain extent. If you know you've got a player who's constantly using barrier, and every time he does, he runs to the end of his duration and then keeps concentrating to keep it up, that, however about power points per turn or whatnot, or if you're using no power points, it doesn't matter. But if I know that, I can keep a little chit at the table to lay in front of that character to remind me, oh, that's there. That means when you got shaken, your power dropped. Mm-hmm. That's there. That means you're taking a multi-action penalty or the duration penalty for the no power points rule, or you owe me another couple of power points to keep that thing running this round. Little things like that you can include in your GM toolkit. It doesn't even necessarily need to be an extra piece of paper to jot down notes. It can be little physical things you've prepped in advance that are nothing more than reminders of what's going on.
So let's say this real quick too then, Dave. Let's say a power has a duration of 3 rounds and 1 additional round per PowerPoint. You spend at the beginning when you cast it. When do you start the countdown on the duration?
I hand them 3 of my duration counters.
Mm-hmm.
And the duration counter is designed to be laid on its side. And that way, they owe me 1 at the start of their turn, every turn. And when they get to that last turn, they turn it over on their side to indicate that they're going to maintain it. And now I know they owe me a PowerPoint every turn because I can look over and immediately see that visualization that I prepped for myself as something that I'm going to be able to remember. And that's a very at the tabletop thing, but it's a more broad in that if you need a tool like that, you know in your game you're going to be counting ammunition, then come up with a way to do it. Is it toothpicks and a paperclip? Is it a little ammunition counter disc that you hand out to all your players that has dots in it for the bullets in the chamber or what?
Shell casings. That's what I use for my Deadlands game. Yeah. It's just random shell casings.
Yeah, I would say this too. When does the round officially begin? So if I cast something with a 3 round on my action, is that 1 round in the round I cast it towards duration, or does the clock start on my next action on the next round?
Now, here's where I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. The way I interpret that and the way they've written up the rules, it's on your next turn, a round has passed. It's not to the top of the round. It's to your next turn that round has.
That's 1 round. So I cast it, and when I get around to my turn in the next action, That's one round that's gone by.
That's the Dave interpretation of the rule.
Right. And what we're saying, though, is it's important to ask yourself that question. Well, wait, when does the countdown start? How am I going to manage this at the table as part of getting your mind right with powers so you're prepared for it when it plays? Now, I'm going to say this is part of game prep, too. Forget about combat ratings or balanced encounters. That shit just does not exist. You got dice that explode wildly. You've got bennies that players can re-roll to make things better than they were before. There's no point, really, in trying to think about a balanced combat encounter or a mechanically balanced counter. Now, I will say this. Make sure it's a thematic and story-based balanced encounter. The sheriff doesn't show up with 300 undead behind him just because you want to make sure you win this scene.
I will say this. When, as a GM, you're prepping this, we talked about that whole have your motivations, have your MO. You might also have a note on there for what's important enough to that character to spend a penny on. And I say this not just for wild cards, but for all the NPCs you think you're going to present to the characters. Because you've got that pile of GM bennies that can be spent on even the extras. Be aware what's important enough to that character that they would spend a penny on. If you've got even an enemy extra who's a marksman and he misses a sniper shot, you're probably going to be throwing a GM Benny out because it's important to that character that they hit that target. Mm-hmm. It may not necessarily matter to your story, but that's where your characters you present to your players can feel stilted if they always serve the story. If everything's for the greater good, sooner or later it feels very stilted. If instead, oh, look, this guy did some dumb shit because he has that character flaw or that thing that's important to him, it will stand out to your players and make the game a little more real, a little more enjoyable, and it gives you one more little thing that's another bullet point that you can add in prep that makes the game that much better.
Now, I'll say this too. So just talking on this point for a second, there's always going to become, you're always going to ask yourself, okay, at what point do the NPCs retreat? Do they retreat or do they fight to the death? Or do they retreat? I think a very interesting MO to give your big bad guy who's hired all these mercenaries is anybody who turns tail and runs, he steps aside out of the combat and kills them for being a coward and running out. So if anybody on his team goes, I surrender, you just GM Fiat, he shoots them in the head, they're dead. Yeah. And it says this very clear message.
The big bad's turn or not, they get force choked as they run away, they get shot in the head. You know, there's an immediate reaction when that NPC's turn has come up and they bolted. If you've got that big bad in the scene that has that thing listed as one of the little detail notes, then they absolutely just automatically do it. You don't wait for it to be combat appropriate and according to the rule. Right.
Yeah, and
you wait for it to be plot appropriate.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And here's something, and we'll say this one more thing about encounter generators, story generators, roll dice, check a table. Great for inspiration. Don't rely on them for your game. Actually figure out the story reason behind certain things. I wouldn't say I use them for inspiration or as a challenge to yourself to go, okay, I got this, that, and the other.
Get together.
Oh, holy shit. How does this work? How do I make sense of what I just rolled?
Session is an amazing game to play as a GM.
I would say, except for if you're gonna use a certain pirate setting called Through Hell and High Water, it's got a really good adventure generator, and but you should use it for inspiration and build off of what you come up with. But it's got a really cool adventure generator.
Yeah, I'm not down on adventure generators. I'm not at all. But I just don't think it's a good habit to get into as a GM to go, shit, I don't have anything prepped. Well, let's roll some dice and see what the fuck happens.
Yeah, 5 minutes before the game, I'm going to sit down, turn to this table, roll like 6 times and know exactly what happens.
Oh.
No, you're going to have a bad game if you do that.
It could be pretty damn exciting to give it a try. I mean,
well,
like that the thing they do at Gen Con called the Iron GM. where you go in, you're given like 3 to 4 distinct things, and then you have a half hour to come up with an adventure for a table of 6 people off of those 3 or 4 things that you were given.
But see, that goes back to that whole use the adventure generator as a challenge for yourself, and you just said it, they get a half hour. Don't sit down 5 minutes before your players are ready to play and make those dice rolls and think that adventure generator tool is going to do all the work.
Right. And here's the other thing too. So if I'm participating in that and I know that's the kind of game we're playing, I'm going to be a lot more forgiving on the failings or shortcomings of the GM in that situation. I'm going to go, well, hey, he didn't have time to prep. He had 5 minutes. He had to run it off the table. All right, I'm going to let some stuff slide. Now, if you show up to the game and you run that, chances are things are going to rise that you're not prepared for, that you haven't thought ahead of, and the players are going to catch you in the middle of you going, hey, guys, you know what? Let's say we're going to take a 5-minute bio break. Well, I go in the bathroom and literally pull the next thing I'm going to do out of my ass. I have no idea what to do. Or you're going to get the deer in the headlights look at the table.
Yeah.
The GM is going to have the deer in the headlights look at the table and look at the player and go, you do what?
That whole story, Stu talks about that on Happy Jacks, where he was running, I think Big Blue Monkeys, and they finished his adventure in an hour and a half of a 4-hour session. And he's like, I need to run to the restroom. And he ran to the restroom and pulled out another, 2.5, 3 hours worth of adventure while he was, in the restroom.
Well, and here's the important part. Don't tell your players you did.
Exactly.
And this, I think, goes to prep if you didn't prep it, don't ever tell your players you didn't prep it. If you present it at the table, it was prepped.
Mm-hmm.
That's what your players need to know. They don't need to know you pulled 95% out of your ass or you pulled 5% out of your ass. That doesn't matter to your players. So long as it all seems coherent, they don't need to know.
Exactly.
Don't tell them you're creating it on the fly because you've just broken the game for that player.
Yep. It's the same thing.
I've made that mistake several times, but I made that mistake one critical time, and that was the first time I GM'd for Jared. I ran a game, and I mentioned something was a complete, out of the seat of my pants thing, and I watched him deflate because it took all the fun out of the game right then.
Yep. I'm gonna put it this way: it's if I go and watch a live magic show, and the magician does this amazing trick, we all know in the audience that there's a trick to it. The art in it is I can't figure out how the hell he did that,
and I don't want to go in the moment and ruin it.
Yeah, if you tell me and show me how it was done, you've ruined it. You've ruined the experience for me. So, yeah, if you pull something completely out of your ass and the character's going, you're a god, that was amazing, just take the compliment and go, yeah, I know. Thanks.
Yeah, don't show them what's behind the curtain. What's behind the curtain is secret.
Before we're out of here, I just want to throw a chat. Last couple minutes of the show, if you've got any questions, you haven't asked much now. Now is absolutely the time to get a question in before we close up.
I think more than anything else, it's just take some extra time for your game prep. Think about your players. Think about the story that you're going to tell. I'm very big on open-ended. I'm not so much a railroad GM. I want a very open-ended experience for my players and for myself because that's just what I prefer. I do fairly well at improv. I'm okay with improv, but the more time you invest in what's going on in this world, what is the point of this scene that the characters are going to be in for this session? What's the point? What is it? Is it plot exposition? Is that what we're trying to get across? Is this a blow off steam moment where I'm going to have a barroom brawl because I'm going to instigate one with the NPC that bumps into the player character? And if the player character goes, "Oh, excuse me," the NPC goes, "Yeah, excuse you. There is no excuse for you. Watch where you're going before I kick your ass," and then throws a wild punch. I mean, if I want a barroom brawl because I think the players are going to enjoy it and it makes sense in the story, I'm just saying, think of those permutations, not only what's happening in the scene, what's the scene about, what could possibly happen in this scene, and am I at least aware of the possibilities. I don't have to be prepared for all of them, but at least aware.
You know, if you know you've got a combat monkey in the party and there hasn't been one, you know you need a combat beat in your game. If you know you've got that face player who loves to role play the down and dirty negotiation, you know, con, etc., then you know you need that beat somewhere in the game. You need to know what excites each player so you can include it, even if you don't prep a lot around those things. I don't need to prep a con, but I need to prep that I'm going to run a con. I don't need to prep a bar brawl. I need to prep that I'm going to have a fight tonight somewhere, just to excite the combat monkey sitting at the table.
So I'm going to give a real quick example, then we'll read the next thing in the thing. But a real quick example. In a zombie apocalypse game, no matter how many times I've run it, I always get situations whenever the player characters are served food, there's always discussion and meta. Oh my god, we're being cannibals. They fed us human beings. Oh my god. Every time there's a food service, barbecue, anything that happens in those games, all the player characters, oh my god, I'm eating human flesh. I know it. Oh shit, I know that's human flesh. Here's what I'm saying. That is a very big signal to me that they want to experience that. I need to pay attention to that. So
they want cannibalism.
At some point, I'm going to be able to shout out tainted meat and be able to run that adventure. But here's the thing. I want to give them if I know that is what they want in the game and they express that through role play, then here's the thing. I'm going to tease it a few times. And then when they least expect it, full on cannibal. Go ahead, Dave.
So CL Taylor asks, if all the players fail to show, do you run a quick on-the-fly game or say, fuck it? I think this is more a session 0 question, but it is certainly something that if you know in your session 0 that you're an on-the-fly group or you're a board game group, you're a card game group, or you're a virtual group and you're going to say, fuck it, or however you decided that in session 0, you need to have that locked and ready to go as part of your prep. Absolutely.
I was going to give the snarky answer. If all the players don't show up, it's kind of hard to have a game.
I'm going to give the dead end answer. And now this is specific to a zombie apocalypse, and I made this clear in our session 0. If you give me notice that you're not going to show up, you're being run as a allied extra by the other players in the group. I can't guarantee you'll live. If you don't show up and you don't let me know, you're dead.
It's guaranteed. Dead. Not only did you not have plot armor, but you have a plot flaw that leads to your death in that session. The GM will just make it so.
Yeah. Now, I will say this. If more than half of the people can't play, then we call it.
And again, I think that's a session 0 discussion that you have that determines those rules. And then the prep side of it is if you've said, hey, anytime we don't have a full house, we're going to play Cards Against Humanity, then you make sure the Cards Against Humanity box is out in case people don't show up.
Right.
If you've said you're going to run, Wrath of Ashardalon, a great board game if you haven't played it, then you need to make sure that that's somewhere nearby and can be laid out on the table you're playing at.
Right. Or Never Have I Ever, if you're going to play that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about what you're going to do when people don't show. It's about knowing what you've established in session 0 is the thing that happens when that happens,
right,
and being ready to run with it. And if you are I'm going to run an impromptu game, I have a backup game. I will just tell you now, it's called Return to Filian Manor, and I can run that literally at a moment's notice. I need no prep. I know that adventure so well, I can run it in my sleep. Mm-hmm. So I have that locked, unless the group I'm playing with has played it before. And then I'll grab another one in the list of the things Dave knows well enough to run in his sleep.
So I don't want to talk down. This is not meant to be snarky at all in case it comes off as snarky, but I think it's very apropos that CL Taylor asked this question. This is part of game prep. What's your game plan for when they don't? Do you already have a game prepped? as a one-shot for the people who are there with pre-gens and you're ready to roll?
This is absolutely the level of prep that goes in at world building level. Have a plan to tell your players during session 0, hey, if only half of you show up, I'm running a board game.
Yeah.
If even one of you misses, we're playing Cards Against Humanity because everyone's integral to the story.
Right. I won't run with less than 3 people.
Right.
You say you don't tell me you're not coming, your character's dead. Guaranteed, be aware of it. If half the people aren't here, we're just not going to run because it's not worth my time.
Right.
So, since we beat that horse, we'll move on to the next one. Jody Connor asks 2 questions. We'll start with the first one. How much time on average do each of you spend prepping for a session?
Woo.
Jared? Because I know what's coming.
I'm going to say this. I think 2 kinds of prep. I do 2 kinds of prep. I do away from the computer prep. I run pretty much on Roll20. So I do away from the computer prep where I'm just I'm in the shower, I'm thinking about the game. I'm doing some mundane task, I'm thinking about the game. Story, what happened last session, what could happen in this session, blah blah blah. That's not prep. I would say probably about 30 to 40 minutes a game, and more on an average. And that's pretty much if I have to come up with character tokens for NPCs that I know are going to show up that session, that I need 30 minutes to kind of throw that together in Roll20.
Chris?
I would say, this is such a horrible answer, but I'm going to give the answer of it really depends. Like, I need to reread the next plot point for Sunday. It'll probably take me half hour, 45 minutes to read through it because, I'll take my time.
You read through it?
Yeah, I'll take my time, and it might take me a little bit longer because I'm going to try what we talked about tonight and try to take a few extra notes so that my face isn't in the book and trying to find stuff the entire time I'm trying to run it. So I would say, it depends. Couple hours maybe, but it's a couple hours sometimes here and there. It's not 2 hours all at one shot. It might be 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. But I guess I don't have a great answer for what I do on a ongoing continual basis for my prep.
I think for my on average, and this is absolutely horrible, but it speaks to the type of GM I am. Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 minutes. That's about how much effort I put into prepping each individual session. With that said, there's a major, huge mountain-sized caveat to this, and that is that when I fall in the, hey, I'm going to run X setting hole, it swallows my life for about 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Because I will immerse myself in that genre of fiction, whether it's through TV or books or what have you. I will generate a shitload of material for Fantasy Grounds, from typing up all my setting rules on the back end through XML to creating all the handouts, the tokens, etc. I will have done all of that prep work in a 3 to 4 week period before I even really announce to the players that I have a game ready to go. I've got, 2 of those settings pretty much constantly going in my cooker at all times. That's what I do when I'm not playing video games or working and anything like that, is I'm constantly working on just setting up a new setting that I could run for my players.
Right.
And that way I'm kind of lock, stock, and ready to run. The nice part of that month-long thing is, it's 2 years later and I'm going to run ETU again. I still have that stuff all loaded in Fantasy Grounds. I'm now only going to take a week to re-immerse myself in that genre and be ready to run with all the player beats. But
Right.
that's what fuels that 5 minutes per session. Is I've done anywhere from a week to a month, depending on how much I have to do physical prep work for a game in advance, because a monster part of my prep all happens before session 0.
Right. And I'm in the same boat. I think if we were going to use a metaphor, Dave and I's approach, I think Dave and I share pretty much the same approach to prep. We take the J.R.R. Tolkien approach. Yeah, it takes us a weekend to write The Hobbit, but goddamn, we spent 6 months to a year writing the Silmarillion before we ever got to The Hobbit.
What's the thing they say about Tolkien is he spent 30 years creating his world so he could write the book, he could write 4 small books.
Right. So, like, yeah, my zombie world, I know what's happening in the Southwest from the day of the outbreak going forward, where the characters are, what's happening socially, politically, everything that's going on in that world. And I understand when I prep the first scene, like when I go, okay, well, we're going to encounter a farm because that's kind of where we're at. I may spend an hour in Roll20 finding images, creating macros, doing things like that. But yeah, for the most part, I think Dave and I are pretty much cut from the same cloth as far as game prep. We do a lot of front loading to understand the world and set up the play space. But when it comes down to real actual prep before the session.
And I will say that only works if you're an improv GM.
Yeah.
Like, Chris couldn't get away with it because if Chris reads the entire plot point cover to cover, even 5 or 6 times prior to running it, he's still going to need to refer back to it anytime he's running somebody else's material. You're going to have to go back and just freshen up on it before you.
Yeah. And most likely I'm going to read it and I'm going to read it 3 or 4 times and I'm still going to forget stuff and screw shit up.
Right. Mm-hmm. And he's going to have a little bit more difficult time thinking quickly on his feet when shit goes left. Suddenly.
I agree with that.
Oh crap. What would happen? Hold on. Give me a second. Okay. Here's what happened.
That happened 2 weeks ago because they kept asking me questions. I'm like, it doesn't matter, but I've got a group that they want the answers. And I don't want to just say to them, okay, it doesn't matter. And the group's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, that's because it's like going to make sense like 2 plot points down the road. So just let it go.
Yeah. You don't know the answer to that question is a great answer when a player has their character asking questions that don't necessarily matter or don't need to be known. The other thing is anything you tell them goes in your notepad.
Yep.
You're going to fuck it up later if you're not careful.
Yeah. I find it's great. Yeah, no, your character doesn't know that. But what's the answer? Listen, player, I'm telling you, your character doesn't know. So therefore, I'm not telling you.
Yeah. So moving on to the last question, because I know Chris is dealing with a time limit here.
Can you tell from all the yawning and stuff going on?
Me too. So let's wrap this one up.
So we'll ask Jody's last question here. What are some signs you are over prepping?
I got an answer. When it stops being fun.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, the king of that is when it's no longer enjoyable for you to spend time prepping for the game. You've absolutely reached the exhaustion point for it.
Yeah, it stops being fun. You're like, fuck, I don't want to deal with this anymore.
That said, I think this goes back to things we were talking about earlier. Like, if your lurid description of the room involves what the walls taste like, how much how heavy the air feels, you've probably gone too far, unless that's the one detail. If you know how heavy the air feels, what the walls taste like, what it smells like, what they see, and you've painted the entire room a complete picture of it in verbal form, you have way over prepped in detail, and you've not left yourself any room for that game to come to life at the table.
Here's my answer to that one. You know you're over prepping when you spend more time on solutions than problems.
So I just want to point out, I
good answer.
A handwritten note from my significant other, which for those of you who can't read her handwriting, it specifically says, "Your girlfriend forgets what you look like."
I'm going to say this. Let me expand on that. When you have more solutions than you do problems. You have to understand that you're not writing a novel. You're not in control of a very key element in this game, and that is player character decision and a randomizer that tells you this is what happens. I don't give a fuck about your story. Here's what happens. So if you're putting all your effort into it, you find yourself spending more time on solutions, you're over prepping. That's a control issue that you need to let go of, and you need to be able to live in the moment. Now, if you've prepped the way we've talked about prepping, anything can organically happen in the scene, and you're prepared for it because
Share the story.
You know what the world is about. You know what's happening in that time and in that space to some degree, and you could roll with the punches. Your job is to create problems and conflict for the characters, not to solve those problems or anticipate the solutions to those problems.
As they say in the dirty hippie games, play to see what happens.
Yeah. So that's my answer. So on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So until next week, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox, and Dave, the Rules Maven Scott, saying keep rolling and stay savage.